This video is sponsored by Reverb LP. Click the link below to buy a vinyl or two and help us keep the physical format of music alive and well. King Crimson's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, is widely regarded as one of the first and most influential albums in the progressive rock genre. The music was far removed from rock music's roots in blues and focused instead on combining elements of jazz, classical, and symphonic music. The result was an epic 43-minute long mix of pure hard rock, adventurous musical landscapes, and deeply emotional lyrics that shocked listeners and inspired a whole new generation of music. Let's take a closer look. Giles and Fripp is the group that comes closest to the first incarnation of King Crimson. Consisting of Michael Giles on drums, his brother Peter Giles on vocals and bass, and Robert Fripp on guitar, the group experimented with a myriad of influences ranging from psychedelic rock, pop, folk, and jazz. The band released a few demos and even a full-length album, but it didn't last very long. Peter Giles left the band in late '68, while his brother Michael and Fripp kept on playing. The new band, along with its new name, was first conceived when they started rehearsing at the Fulham Palace Cafe in London on January 13th, 1969. Peter Sinfield was the one who came up with King Crimson as the band name, and about finding the name, he said, "Anything was better than Giles and Fripp. King Crimson had an arrogance to it." Some people believe it's a nod to demons or the devil himself, but no matter how you choose to interpret the name, it's very certain that the album artwork gives off an ominous feeling. Fripp recalled how the band would often practice from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. They were doing a lot of improvisation as well as developing new song ideas. The first 9 days was shaking hands and getting to know each other. The second 9 to 10 days, something very different took place. There was very much a sense of this is a group which will speak with its own voice, without any compromise whatsoever.
Set the straight man to the late man.
By the time they decided to record the Crimson debut album, the band consisted of drummer Michael Giles, vocalist and bassist Greg Lake, multi-instrumentalist Ian MacDonald, lyricist Peter Sinfield, and guitarist Robert Fripp. Much of the early anticipation and success for the band's debut is due to their live concert in July 1969 in Hyde Park. Here, they supported Rolling Stones in front of an audience of over 250,000 attendants. This was a free concert to honor the memory of Rolling Stones founder Brian Jones. The guitarist passed away earlier that month, and King Crimson vocalist Greg Lake remembers the concert as very polarizing. It was a sad day in a way, because it was commemorating the death of Brian Jones, and on the other hand, it was really the birth of King Crimson.
Hard rock, barbed wire, politicians in all part.
It was the first time the public at large really got to have a look at the band. And it was the first time that we realised that the band had what, for want of a better description, would be mass acceptance.
The band was all about challenging the rock music of the 60s, and one example of this is their use of the mellotron. In many ways regarded as the precursor to the modern synth and keyboard, the mellotron would give the music an ethereal and otherworldly sound that was virtually non-existent just a few years before. By the time King Crimson started the recording of their debut album, mellotron manufacturers had produced a second generation of their instrument known as MK2. This was a cheaper, lighter, and more durable version of the original. Ian MacDonald spent a ton of time in the studio adding layers of mellotron in addition to various woodwind and reed instruments, giving the album an eerie and swaying feel.
Fusion will be my epitaph.
Another example of the band's progressiveness can be found in the Lyrical Themes. 21st Century Schizoid Man, Epitaph, and In the Court of the Crimson King all contain dark apocalyptic messages that are in contrast to the popular peace and love message of the hippie movement. Instead of making love, they wanted to stare reality dead in the eye. Some people are quick to note the backdrop of the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the possibility of nuclear destruction as possible inspirations for these lyrics. Again, it certainly explains the frightened facial expression on the cover. But more than that, it explains why the opening track is one of the heaviest songs of its time and regarded as one of the earliest heavy metal songs. There's certainly a lot of music that flirted with heavier sounds around this time. For example, just a few months later in 1970, Black Sabbath released what people traditionally regard as the first heavy metal record. But 21st Century Schizoid Man definitely foreshadowed that movement.
We just refused to play anything that sounded anything like a Tin Pan Alley pop song. So if it sounded at all popular, it was out. If it sounded like too simple, we would make it more complicated. We'd play it on 7/8 or 5/8 just to show off.
Their eagerness to be different at all costs created a clear reaction amongst audiences when they played their first concerts. After playing their heaviest songs, there would be this intense silence at the end. People didn't know what to do. They were speechless. No one had heard a rock band perform such complex passages and dark lyricism ever before. But what some people found even more impressive than the album was their live shows. Michael Giles would take the band through rumbling drum fills in 1 minute and the most gentle tapping of a cymbal in the next one. You would certainly get a powerful experience on the album, but an even more visceral experience live. During one performance, Robert Fripp panicked, took off his boot, and started banging on the stage with it because he couldn't stand the silence.
I don't know if it's a politic of me to say it, but I think that Crimson is an infinitely better live band than recording band. In the Court of the Crimson King was generally considered the best Crimson album, but even that was only a very distant reflection of what the band was like. It's the difference between writing a letter to a friend and going to see them.
The album faced heavy competition when it was released on October 10th, 1969. About half a month earlier, the Beatles had released Abbey Road, and a couple of weeks later, Led Zeppelin II was released. And since they managed to stand beside giants in the music industry and still sell well, it was clear that Crimson had tapped into something very unique musically. This has caused a lot of people to wonder what the band would go on to do if they stayed together. You see, after they released and toured their debut album, the members faced creative differences, as so many different bands have done throughout the years. This was especially the case between multi-instrumentalist Ian MacDonald and guitarist Robert Fripp. MacDonald wanted to take the music in a more romantic direction, while Fripp wanted it to be even more experimental. Michael Giles, Greg Lake, and Ian MacDonald left the band while Robert Fripp and Peter Sinfield stayed behind, thus closing the first chapter of the band's history, and thus closing the chapter of the band's most famous album as well. There's really no record like In the Court of the Crimson King. This year is the band's and the record's 50th anniversary, and it's crazy how this record is so old, yet still sounds so modern and punchy. It's even become a meme by now, since thousands of young fans ironically try to upload it to YouTube to then see how many days it will take before Frippman removes it. Like a handful of other bands, King Crimson are still hesitant to putting all their music on streaming platforms, which, it's their own choice, but it sucks. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you want to buy a copy of this album online while still supporting local record stores in the US, then make sure you click the link below to visit Reverb LP. There's a bunch of different variations and releases of this album over there, so make sure you go there, and I'll see you on the other side.